Chapter 3. Vilmos's First Disguise. When Vilmos saw his pot of swinfen fly from the castle window, he took off, racing through the winding laneways and back streets of Ragnor, till he came to the fields and meadows that surrounded the old city. Here on the outskirts was the executioner's field, where nothing grew but swinfen and thorns. At the edge of the field, hidden behind a fence of diagonally crossed logs, was the stone lodge that Vilmos called home. This lodge had been home to the executioners of Ragnor for almost 300 years, since the times of the Great Wars. Vilmos hurried inside, shut and bolted the door, and collapsed. "Oh, why did I send the swinfen?" he asked Tevel, his yellow rat. His mouth twitched with malicious glee. It was foolhardy, but fun. On the table was Vilmos's most precious possession, a thin and tatty book that contained 4 spells given to him by Inico, a wizard of Nartisk. "Practice these and one day you can have more," Inico had told Vilmos when he was only 10 years old. "They will make you very powerful." "When?" Vilmos had asked. The pair were at Lucy Cave, a meeting place surrounded by smoking fires. "When you have committed your first act of revenge," Inico said. "Maybe one day you'll be a wizard like us." "I'm going to be an executioner like my father," said Vilmos. "He says it's an important task, getting rid of the kingdom's criminals." Inico had smiled and tucked the package of blood-stained muslin that Vilmos brought into his satchel. "Thank your father for this. If you change your mind, come and see me after you've completed your revenge." On the table, next to the spellbook, were 5 detailed maps of Ragnor Castle. One had belonged to Vilmos's father, who knew the underground dungeons and torture chambers like the back of his hand. Another Vilmos had bought from the candlemaker, who always had some interesting things in his cart. The rest of the maps he had made himself after spying on the castle. Food and sleep were often forgotten, as he noted every door and window and sent the rats to explore the secret tunnels. Vilmos poured himself a drink. "Well, dear Tevel," he said to the rat, who was busy with some rotten meat in the corner, "our work is almost done. We know all the ways into the castle and all the ways out." That night, Vilmos heard stones clattering onto the roof of the stone lodge. The next morning, he heard someone banging loudly on the gate. He opened the front door and was forced to walk through rotten fruit and vegetables that had been thrown over the fence. Obviously, people had heard something about him, but what? He opened the gate to a narrow-faced man and recognized King Harmon's trusted manservant, Jabade. "I come with a message from the king," said Jabade. "He says if you go near Irina, he'll have you executed." What gave him that idea? Is that what the old witch said? She doesn't like me. She's stirring up trouble." "Don't get your hackles up," said Jabade. "If I were you, I'd count myself lucky I wasn't getting arrested right now." "So what?" said Vilmos. "It's not as if the king would revoke his new laws to have me killed." "I wouldn't try him," said Jabade, turning to go. "You know the king's temper." Later that week, Vilmos learned the stories about him had spread. When he tried to buy milk and eggs at the market, a farmer's wife said to him, "How dare you show your face? Everyone knows you're after Princess Irina." That's just a rumour, said Vilmos, because old Razel doesn't like me. You've got murderer's blood in your veins, said the farmer's wife. Murderer? Cried Vilmos. The executioner used to be respected in Ragnall. The farmer's wife wrinkled her nose. And you smell of mice and bad cabbages. But I could sell you this nice perfume. Pinecone, quite good for a man. Vilmos bought the perfume, and when he got home, he set about disguising himself. Over the following weeks, he plucked his eyebrows, grew a beard, and darkened his hair with walnut juice. Late one night, when he and Teeval were out exploring the tunnels under Ragnall Castle, Vilmos overheard that King Harman was planning to travel to Pavelda secretly for a meeting with King Nicholas the next day. This is our chance, Teeval, he whispered. They left the tunnels beneath Ragnall Castle and made their way to the far side of the city. Their destination was a shrine to the Junsong, or the Way of Truth. There were many of these shrines in Ragnall. Inside each one was a picture of Jun, the goddess of truth, painted in the vivid colours of egg tempera. Making sure no one was around, Vilmos opened the shrine's iron gates, reached in and wrenched the precious painting from the wall. When she sees this picture, she will trust me, the would-be magician said to himself. Before dawn, the next morning, Vilmos dressed in the velvet garb of an artist and carefully filled the pockmarks on his face with clay to make it smooth. He put what he needed into a satchel and made his way to Ragnall Castle, his stomach churning with nerves, watching in the shadows until he saw King Harman leave secretly from a side gate. Morning sun made the marble steps gleam like snow. Vilmos lifted the painting of Jun onto his back and struggled up the majestic staircase to the castle doors. He was greeted by the king, by the captain of the guard, and 6 armed men. "Gift for the Queen, sir," Vilmos told the captain of the guard. He was sweating heavily. I am a famous painter, and I have been summoned to paint the loveliest queen ever in the house of Ragnall." "No one sees the Queen without an appointment," said the young captain, whose name was Kellen. He was new to the job, a broad, hefty fellow, and as strong as a plank. He disliked the glistening beads of sweat on the artist's forehead. Of course, but I've come to paint her portrait. Show her this and see what she says." Vilmos held the painting out in front of him like a shield. "She'll be most displeased if you send me away." The young captain was unsure, but he bade one of his soldiers take the panel to his mistress. After some time, the soldier returned and spoke quietly to Captain Kellen, who nodded. "It seems the Queen would like a portrait of herself with Princess Irina." He checked Vilmos's cloak for weapons. "You may only be in the Queen's presence with 2 soldiers in the room. Leave your bag here." "But I need my paints and brushes and the panel to paint on, sir." Kellen opened Vilmos's bag and examined its contents: brushes, wood panels, a palette and a folded easel, an empty bottle with a cork stopper in it. Small glass jars of powdered pigment, red, ochre, and ultramarine blue. 2 eggs. Kellen held one up with a questioning look. "To make the paint, sir, you have to extract the yolk and mix the pigment." The captain waved him in impatiently, and then 2 soldiers escorted him to the Queen's bedchamber. Vilmos caught his breath. There she was, the beautiful Chloe, sitting on a velvet chair with Princess Irina on her lap. For a moment, he was a lovesick youth again. No, he thought, don't forget how nasty she was, how disrespectful. Next to the Queen was the Sylvan. He was white, with a soft patterning of silver over his long, graceful tail, almost like lace. Vilmos stared. The forest birds were rarely seen by humans and impossible to catch. They were said to be highly intelligent and loyal, but Vilmos didn't care about that. He knew they were worth a lot of money. The Sylvan cooed before tucking his handsome head under his wing. A nurse sat in another chair, embroidery on her lap, her feet resting on a round woolen rug. Baby Irina sat upright on the Queen's lap, soft-cheeked and bonny, sunlit curls escaping her cap. Chloe looked up at Vilmos and gave a smile of greeting. Vilmos held his breath. Would she recognize him? He'd taken great efforts to change his appearance, his voice, even his smell. Instead of his slightly rotten odour, he smelled as wholesome as a pine cone. Your work is exquisite. You must be a very great artist, said Chloe. Vilmos let out a short breath of relief and bowed low. So glad to bring pleasure, Your Majesty. Is it a painting of the goddess Jun, or the princess, our ancestor, who is named after her? Which do you think? Replied Vilmos with his most charming smile. She had no idea he was her old enemy. He could hardly believe his own daring. Well, let me see, said Chloe, gazing at the image. She looks almost like you can see right through her. She's so delicately painted. I would say she's the goddess. Vilmos clapped his hands. Your Majesty is very perceptive, very smart, he said, but not smart enough. Would you be able to paint a portrait of me and the Princess Irina together? It would be a wonderful gift for the king. I've never had lovelier subject, said Vilmos, smoothly, careful to hide his annoyance at her mention of the king. He hid behind his easel, busying himself with making the paints. So foolish, so easily tricked, he muttered. What did you say? Chloe called. A profound honour to paint the Queen. And the Princess? The Princess, yes, the Princess. Vilmos placed the wooden panel upon his easel while Chloe sang lullabies to soothe the wriggling Irina. The Sylvan slept on his gilded perch. How shall I pose? Asked Chloe. She was enjoying herself. Put the baby higher on your lap. Press your cheek against hers. Vilmos took out a densely woven cloth that he had coated with wax. Please excuse me while I put this on. He tied it over his nose and mouth. The smell of eggs distracts me from painting my best. Behind the panel, Vilmos pulled the stopper out of the glass bottle he had brought with him. The sleeping spell slid from the bottle's neck like smoke and briefly took the shape of a woman in a transparent, grimy, yellow-green dress. She shimmered and stretched out her hands with long, talon-like nails, then dissolved into the air. Deep in the forest, where wild blackberries knitted themselves with rose brambles, stood a small hut. Inside the hut was the wise woman Razel, sat on the earth floor beside a fireplace, meditating. She was warmed by the sunlight coming in through the smoke hole in the roof, until a cool shadow fell over her. She looked up and saw a crow opening his beak to make 3 deafening caws. Razel understood immediately. "Vilmos!" she cried. She saw a picture of him in her mind, in Chloe's room. Then she saw Harmon with Nicholas in the hall at Pavel. The wise woman got up and hurried from her hut. Outside, she raised her scrawny arms to the sky, calling her pigeons, sylvans and ravens. They landed on her shoulders, her head, her elbows, even her thumbs. She chose 2 pigeons and tied notes to their feet, one for King Harmon and one for Captain Kellen. She summoned a wild horse from the forest, and while she waited, she rummaged through her baskets and stone jars, gathering every herb and magic powder she could think of, and jamming them all into a sack. The hare bounded up and leapt in 2, flattening his ears so he could fit inside. "What's the use of having these wonderful spells? Destiny comes and goes like an ocean wave," Razel said to the hare. Her dark eyes glinted inside their folds of skin. Even the sharpest sword leaves no mark on the sea. Vilmos looked around the Queen's parlour and let out a short laugh, like a dog's bark. Everyone was asleep, and the mask had protected him from the spell perfectly. The soldiers had collapsed, their armour clanking, and were now snoring. The nurse's head lolled to one side, and the embroidery needle dangled from her lap, hanging by a thread. The Queen and baby Irina were huddled closely, still cheek to cheek. "Ha!" said Vilmos with another bark of laughter. "Too easy." He bent down and prized Chloe's arms away from the sleeping baby. No one stirred. He placed Irina inside his bag, then grabbed the sleeping sylvan from its perch and stuffed it in recklessly too. He'd sell the bird at the market. He slung the bag over his shoulder, and the baby's sleeping face peeked out at the top. Raising his foot, he gave the chair a sharp kick, and the nurse fell to the floor. Then he pulled away the rug and lifted the trapdoor on its squeaky hinges. Outside Ragnall Castle, a carrier pigeon flew down and landed on Captain Kellen's hand. Startled, he snatched the bird, the note from the bird's foot. "The princess is in danger. Banish the stranger," he read. His stomach rolled with a sick lurch of realization. He had made a terrible mistake. White-faced, he turned to Sherrod, his second in command. "The Queen is in danger. Go to the barracks and get the soldiers to surround the castle. Hurry!" Kellen raced along the corridor to the Queen's bedchamber and pushed open the heavy doors. There he found the guards sprawled on the floor in deep sleep, their heads jutting awkwardly from their armour. The Queen was curled up in her chair, her lovely face slumped to one side, and her arms, for the first time since Irina's birth, empty. And there was the nurse on the ground, the rug cast aside, and a trapdoor open in the floor. The underside of the trapdoor was swathed in spiders' webs. It hadn't been used in years. Within minutes, soldiers were pouring into the castle from all sides. They stormed up the corridors, making a tremendous din. "The artist has kidnapped the princess. Get the dogs," said Captain Kellen as the soldiers appeared. The Queen made a slight moan. "You four, guard the Queen. Keep her here no matter what." Kellen pointed to another group and told them to wait underground by the tunnel exits. He said to the rest, "We must rescue the princess, or our lives won't be worth living."